Okay, now we're recording. See if she let me. Okay, I want to reiterate what the themes are for this class, and okay. And we went over this last week. Maybe some of you were not in last week's thing, but the 3 points I wanted to emphasize was we're going to be studying these various teachers as seekers rather than scholars. And I use the word gudosha, meaning those who seek the way. And the other point was that we're here to deepen our own understanding. But also, I want you to think about whether this approach of Kiyozawa and the others is going to be helpful at your own locations for reaching people who haven't encountered Shin or maybe had unsatisfactory presentations. And then one point I want to emphasize the idea of community. So today I'm actually going to touch on all 3 points in talking about Manshi Kiyozawa. So last week I went over an overview of what Kindai Kyogaku means, meaning this modern period in Japan from the time they opened up to the West to the post-war years. And today and the next session on December 30th, I want to concentrate on Manshi Kiyozawa, because he's sort of the pivotal figure that represents that transition from the old Tokugawa period, the shogunate period, to what we call the modern, the Kindai, the period of Shinshu in the Higashio tradition. And one of the things that's said about Kiyozawa, I've heard somebody say about Kiyozawa, is that he is like Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, in that he didn't have a teacher. And I think that statement is not quite accurate. And what I want to point out is that we all have that seeking spirit within us, but it helps to have someone in front of us that amplifies, that expresses that seeking spirit in their own life. And I think most of you know the word sensei, but literally sensei means, sen means to go before, and sei is life. And if you think about the literal meaning in the Buddhist context, sensei is the person that we see before us. They're head on the path of seeking, and they inspire us to also be seekers. And so in the life of the Shakyamuni Buddha, a lot of you have heard me talk about that at our temple. We often say that of the 4 gates story, old age, sickness, and death, on the 4th gate, he saw the beggar, the one with the shining face, what they call Kogen Gigi in the Tambutsuge or Sambutsuge. And that was a person who inspired Shakyamuni Buddha to leave the palace and go seek the truth as well. But also Shakyamuni was fortunate. He lived at a time in India where there were a lot of people seeking. It was a big thing at that time because the old time religion of animal sacrifices to send your prayers to the god just wasn't working for a lot of people. So people wanted to seek some other way to get in touch with their spirituality. So there were a lot of movements of people at that time who were seekers. But one thing I've often talked about, although I don't have much documentation for it, I think one of the earliest examples for Shakyamuni was his own stepmother, Prajapati, who took over the care of him as a baby when his own birth mother, Maya, passed away. And we don't have much documentation, but there's something about the sadness, the grief that she's dealing with, and that might have influenced him to be a seeker, to be more sensitive to what's going on around him rather than his own desires. And I think one of the proofs of that is she became the first nun. She was the one, as soon as he came back to the palace with his message of enlightenment, she was the first one to ask of the women to join the Sangha. As you probably know, she wasn't successful. It took her couple more tries before Buddha's cousin Ananda intervened and advocated for the women. But that idea of the mother being the sensei, being the person ahead on the path. And so another example is the Queen Vaidehi, Prince Ajatasattu's story. I'm not going to go into in detail, but a lot of you know the Contemplation Sutra story, but I would say go to the Jodo Shinshu and read Shinran's quotes of the Nirvana Sutra, and you'll see how Queen Vaidehi plays a role there. But today I'm going to talk about the sensei for Kiyozawa was his mother. His father was a samurai and followed the Zen tradition, but the mother was known to be quite a devout Jodo Shinshu follower. She not only went to the local temple, but she went as far as she could go to various other temples to hear different speakers. So she, from the very young age of Manshi Kiyozawa, he saw this sensei, this person ahead of him on the path who's seeking. And one of the quotes that I've heard that I guess Kiyozawa reported that his mother would say is she felt there was this thin paper barrier that she felt she couldn't fully understand the teachings of Shinran. Most people would say they hit the wall, but in her case, she said she had this feeling there's this barrier, but it was just thin enough that somehow one should be able to break through that barrier, but she very much felt there's some kind of barrier to fully understanding. And so since she expressed that to her son, it does become a kind of a command to him that if a lot of people are feeling that way, if his mother's feeling that way, and a lot of other people who are seekers are feeling that way, he should help in trying to get Shinshu out there so people can get past that barrier of understanding, so people can have a better sense of access to those teachings of Shinran. And there's stories, if you read a couple of his biographies, he was tempted upon graduating from the University of Tokyo to go into all kinds of fields. He would be very much in demand for a lot of government and business jobs, but his mother showed up as his graduation dressed as a nun. She cut her hair and wore these simple robes, and even said to him that I hope you will be my sensei. I want you to be the person, hopefully you will be part of the help I need to understand the Shinshu teaching. So she's almost like in the story of Shakyamuni, when he's sitting under the tree and enjoying his enlightenment, he hears the voice of the gods saying, there are people out there who want to hear what you have to say. There are people out there that you should be sharing the Dharma with. And so Kiyozawa's mother was sort of that voice of the people, saying this was great teachings of Shinshu, and we need it to be more accessible. So in that case, I would say his mother was definitely his sensei, but also Kiyozawa was at a time, especially when he went to the University of Tokyo and got to meet all these other Higashi Honganji scholars. There are these men ahead of him that were quite brilliant. And so I think he was inspired by these fellow students and the teachers, and even someone like Ernest Fenollosa, who came from America to teach at the college, was a seeker himself. So Kiyozawa was exposed to all these different people who had that seeking spirit. So I wouldn't say he was someone just popped out of nowhere, but he had these senseis in his life. So that's one thing I wanted to emphasize. And now I'm going to go to this, let's see. Today we're going to talk about this Seishin Shugi. And that is a tricky word, in that when Kiyozawa, after he read his biography, he taught in Kyoto for a while. He joined the reform movement, and that ended up in utter failure, where he and his colleagues were expelled from Higashi Honganji. Their priest credentials were taken away, and he became also very sick, and he spent some time at his in-laws' temple, feeling very useless. So that's why they have the title December fan. He felt as useless as a fan in December. But then things turned around for him, where Higashi Honganji decided they needed to have a world-class university, and they realized all the guys that they had expelled from that reform movement were the brilliant minds they needed to be the teachers at that university. So all was forgiven, and they were brought back into the fold, and Kiyozawa was asked to be the president of this new university. And one of his demands was that the university would be started in Tokyo. So in that sense, he is kind of following Shakyamuni and also Shinran, in that Buddhism needs to be where the people are. It needs to be in the middle of the marketplace. So he got that demand satisfied. Of course, later the school moved to Kyoto and became what we know as Old Tani University. But at the time it was called Shinshu College. It was in Tokyo because that's where Kiyozawa wanted it. And also he developed around him at that time a group of young followers and fellow seekers. I guess you could say all fellow seekers, not just his followers, but they were all seeking the path. And they some of them lived together with him, or they helped him with this magazine. And that whole movement is what they call Seishin Shugi. So it's not an invention purely of Kiyozawa, but it's the name of a whole movement of these young people in Higashi Honganji who are educated in the Western sciences and philosophy. And they had this mission to try to make Shinshu, especially the teachings of Shinran, accessible to people of their time and place. And a lot of times Seishin Shugi is translated as spiritualism or something. Seishin is spirit or spiritualism or spirituality. Seishin, spirituality. Shugi is this word that means the main focus. And in Japan, it was used a lot for all these new ideas coming from the West. So socialism was Shakai Shugi, and then communism was it Kyodo Shugi or something like that. And then democracy was Minshu Shugi. They had Shugi for all these different concepts coming, and a lot of times it's translated as ism, ISM. So sometimes they say Seishin Shugi is spiritualism. But Dr. Netta in the book December Fan, I hope most of you got the copy of it, he translated as spiritual awareness. And I really like that translation the best, because Kiyozawa and his group was not trying to advocate some kind of a party, political party or spiritual party. It was a movement to bring the focus on spirituality. And when I first started studying Kiyozawa, I thought it was to bring back spirituality to the Jodo Shinshu institution. But now I realize, because Kiyozawa was at a time when Japan was rapidly westernizing. It went from a feudal society to this industrial revolution, and Japan was very rapidly seeing itself as on the par as with the European countries and America in getting the technology and the financial structures up and running to match theirs. And I think Kiyozawa and his group realized this is a time to remind people to focus on spirituality. With all this stuff coming from the West, it's so easy to get caught up in the materialism. You see all this great progress and all these great gadgets and things going on, these concepts, but I think they felt this is the time to remind people of the spiritual aspect of life. And I think even now this is something we should be aware of as well, because we do live in a society where there's a lot of things pulling us away from spirituality, pulling us toward materialism. And one example right now is Christmas is coming up. And instead of hearing a lot of messages about spirituality, you're hearing a lot of messages of buy, buy, buy. You know, you're going to make your friends and family happy if you buy this, or you won't be happy unless they buy you this. So, even right now, we're being deluged with all these messages of materialism. So this idea of spiritual awareness that Kiyozawa and his group tried to bring out to the public was an important message for Japanese people to hear at that time. And I think it's still a great message that we need to look at for us. Knowing that not everybody has the book, I just wanted to kind of go over one of the passages, but I would say all the essays in that book are great. It's a great selection of showing what this movement was talking about. So it wasn't just about Jodo Shinshu, but even just to bring Buddhism into this modern conversation that for the Japanese were in their daily lives as kind of a something offering different than the message of materialism that they're getting. And another, as you probably know Japanese history, another I could say disease that they inherited from the West at that time, the late 19th century, early and throughout most of the 20th century, was imperialism. There's this idea that you have to conquer other countries to assert your power. So there's all these very destructive forces going on coming into Japan that the Seishin Shugi group is trying to be the counterbalance to that, to bring us back to what's really important, the spirituality. So this is toward the beginning of that piece. And in their magazine that was called Seishin Kai, the world of spirituality, this was the first article to introduce to people what their movement was about and what they hope in the months ahead, what they were going to do in their magazine, which had a very wide circulation in Japan. And also the group also opened for public lectures on Sundays. And so they had this very active presence in Japanese society in Tokyo, and not just in the Jodo Shinshu circles. So in this initial issue of the Seishin Kai, they have this piece called Seishin Shugi, the spiritual awareness. And so he writes, how can one attain that perfectly firm ground, that rikyakuchi, this basis? He said, in my opinion, when you arrive at it only through an encounter with the infinite, or the absolute, it is unnecessary to speculate whether the infinite is within or without, because the infinite is where the seeker finds it. We cannot define the infinite as internal or external. We cannot stand on firm ground except by encountering the infinite. This is what we call spiritual awareness, the process of inner development through which we can gain that perfectly firm ground. Spiritual awareness refers to finding contentment wholly within the realm of the spirit. A person who has spiritual awareness does not become a victim of distress or frustration caused by his pursuit of things or people. Although he may pursue external objectives, he does not do it out of a sense of lack. How could a spiritually awakened person feel discontent? He finds his contentment in the infinite, not the finite, limited realm of things and people. So here, as I introduced last session, he uses the term infinite and finite. Finite, but the Japanese terms really refer, I think they're better translated to say the bounded or the limited versus the unlimited, and to realize our limits, to realize we are limited beings, our perceptions, our thinking are all very limited, our lifespans are very limited. But if we encounter the idea that life is unbounded, that life is something beyond our conceptions, that would be what uh, in English is called infinite. So here he doesn't use the traditional terms of Bombu and Tathagata or something like that. He uses these terms coming from the Western philosophy of infinite and finite. And he goes on to say it's not about just your individual self, but being able to be an effective contributor to society, to get rid of that sense of egocentrism that like he says, is chasing after things or chasing after people's approval, to get free of that kind of ego-centered thing that the I guess the materialistic society keeps pounding in our head, you know. But to free yourself from that and find that your life really is in the hands of this unbounded life. And as I think we said last time, most of you already know that means Amida, the unbounded light, the Amitayus or Amitabha, the unbounded light. So he's right from the get-go in this magazine, he's stating that the basis for our life is to open up to that idea of the unbounded life, and not get caught up in this narrow egocentric view of things. But what's interesting about the article I like is he does make a point that it is about being part of community and doing what you can as a member of the community. And because one of the misconceptions I encountered with Kiyozawa, people think he's just an individualist, or his group members were all just talking about looking within themselves. But really it's to look within oneself to catch that egoism and open up to the unbounded life, to be aware of that. And I think for all you, most of you attending, you know that awareness is what is sparked in us by the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu. So that awareness of the infinite, of the unbounded life, is what we hear in the Nembutsu, the Namu Amida Butsu. But of course, Kiyozawa writes very sparingly about Nembutsu or Namu Amida Butsu. He feels at this time is a time to reintroduce these ideas in a way that aren't bogged down by the traditional terminology that may have some different connotations than what was originally intended by Shinran. So he doesn't rely on some of those traditional terms, but instead talks about infinite and finite. The next I wanted to go into one more piece, and this is a piece some of you have heard me talk about at a couple of different seminars. One thing I love about this piece is human commitment in the Buddhist work. It's really helpful, I think, for those who are in the sandwich generation, who feel that there's a lot going on in their responsibilities. People are taking care of parents and elderly relatives, and at the same time you're babysitting grandkids or taking care of a spouse or siblings that may not be doing so well, or you got other responsibilities such as work and different volunteer commitments. And in particular, I think women find themselves in that situation of trying to do so many things for so many different people. So this piece, I like it because he reminds us that not to let that bog you down, that feeling of responsibility bog you down. So he says, so again, he, just like in the Seishin Shugi, said, what is the primary basis of our life? It is our trust in the power beyond self. So here, instead of, and this is Dr. Neda's translation of Tariki, of saying, look beyond the self for the real strength, the real help that can help you get through your life. Look beyond your limited self. And so when we have that trust in the power beyond self, there's no such thing as our self's commitment or our self's duty. The self itself does not exist here. Whatever self we find within us is evil. aside from things that the Buddha commands us to do, there's nothing we have to do. We do whatever the Buddha bids us to do. And I know some people don't like the term evil, but here he's stating one of the main themes in Jodo Shinshu is the way to get past our ego attachment is to see the limitations of ourself, and the limitation, not to consider that there's some kind of inherent good in our judgments, that there's some inherent good in how we see the world and how we contribute to the world. So calling it evil may seem extreme, but it's a way, it's a term to help people detach from that sense of clinging to oneself as the good guy. I'm the good guy, everybody else is wrong. I'm the one who's right and everybody else is wrong. But to realize that my limited self, the way I see things, is not completely good. It's not completely true and right. It's very limited. So I think in Jodo Shinshu, we have to be careful not to get into the self-esteem issue. That's a completely different issue than what Shinran is talking about. Self-esteem is more of an issue of, it's kind of an issue of the ego, and it's kind of feeling one's worth is based on other external things. And I think in a way Kiyozawa addresses that also in his works, that we need to free ourselves from taking our worth from external standards. So by saying ourself is evil, it's not saying ourself is worthless. It's just saying we should not be attached to our own judgments and actions as thinking that they're the only good stuff in the world and everything else is wrong-headed. So that's why he does come out very strongly, Kiyozawa, saying if you do think you're doing something good because it's you, then that's not right. So he says we engage in various activities for the benefit of the world and of people, not because we do them, but because the Buddha makes us do them. Since the Buddha makes us perform all our actions, activity, there is nothing of which we can be proud. There is nothing that we can consider to be our own merit. The only thing there can be is gratitude to the Buddha for guiding us. Further, whatever we do not do is what the Buddha does not make us do. There is no need to regret failure to work for the benefit of humanity. There is nothing to be distressed about, even if we cannot contribute to the benefit of the world. And here, actually, in this piece, he actually uses the word Buddha, not Tathagata or some of the other terms that he uses in other places. And so he's not saying Buddha in the sense of a deity or some kind of actual person or being, but as he says in this piece and other pieces, he's talking about a karma. He's talking about our karmic causes and conditions. So it's not like there's someone named Buddha that's going to tell you, oh, you should do this or you can't do that. But it's our karma brings us into a situation where we are enabled to do things for the benefit of the world. And sometimes our karma brings us into situations where as much as we'd like to help out, we can't. Illness is one of those things I think a lot of us have experienced. Sometimes there's things you want to do, but illness is sort of a big stop sign saying, no, you can't, not at this time. And so if we start to accept the causes and conditions of our lives, we don't have to have this calculation all the time of what should I be doing, what's the right thing to do, or what is the wrong thing to do, how come I'm not doing enough, but just realize karma brings us to these situations. And also this piece makes it clear that it's not just what I do by my own efforts, but what I'm able to do through the help of others, through opening up to receiving the help of others, to recognizing all the different ways that we are enabled to do what we can do. So this whole piece is something I do like. It's a piece I like to talk about a lot because we all get caught up in that feeling of um, trying to do too much or feeling bad about not doing enough. But this reminds us to settle down into accepting the causes and conditions. And in some ways, causes and conditions would bring you into things that you never thought you'd get involved in. But you find yourself called in that sense to get involved. And so this piece and the other piece and most of the Seishin Shugi pieces are always talking about community, about being involved with the world and doing what you can, not as an individual, but as part of this greater causes and conditions, all kind of working in a very intricate way. So Kiyozawa puts it, I think it's very concrete that when they say relying on Amida or relying on Tariki, the other power, it's not some vague divine spirit that's out there, but it's very concrete. He even says the events and people. This is all that unbounded life. The events and people in our lives are what's guiding us and what's helping us. So these two pieces, I think, I just put those little quotes out there to give you a little flavor of how Kiyozawa writes about this. And Seishin Shugi, I want to emphasize again, it was a collaborative effort, it was a collaborative movement. I think Kiyozawa himself demonstrated the idea of relying on this unbounded life by having this very intimate interaction with the young men of his group, always challenging them and always having this back and forth. I heard, there's reports that they would just stay up all night sometimes just talking about different things. And also they're very grateful to him to pointing out how they get too stuck in their ideas. Like Akirasu in the Shadow of Buddha, I believe, talks about Kiyozawa. You think you're agreeing with him, but then he pulls out the rug from under you and said, no, that's not what I said. But Kiyozawa himself, from his point of view, is relying on them to be his, to be part of his seeking, to be part of his learning. So for them, he was this continual learner. He didn't get stuck on any particular idea as it has to be this way, but he's always opening up to learning what he can from various texts. In fact, you probably, if you in the readings, you hear that he not only took a lot of inspiration from Shinran, and particularly he talked about the Tannisho, but also from Epictetus, the Greek philosopher. And then you probably read that he was very inspired by the historic Buddha. And I even hear now in Japan, part of the Jodo Shinshu education for ministers doesn't include much about the historic Buddha. And so for Kiyozawa and his generation, it was kind of a revelation when they actually received it in English. The Agama Sutras, these sutras from the Pali canon, talking about the life of the Buddha. So it was kind of an eye-opener to Kiyozawa reading in English to hear about these sutras that weren't paid that much attention to in Japan at that time. They were considered themselves Mahayana, and then talk about the actual Buddha as the person. But now Kiyozawa is reading about Buddha as the person. When he sees that seeking spirit of the Buddha, he couldn't help but he said, his sleeves became wet with tears because he was so happy to know that the Buddha was a human being just like him, just like his mother, a person who went out to seek and continued seeking and used his experiences through interacting with different people to keep on learning and seeking. So there's that feeling in Kiyozawa that he admired that continual seeking. And of course, Shinran was a great example of this continual seeking too. So Kiyozawa had this seeking spirit that the younger folks around him couldn't help but be inspired by. His group included, he had the three main students, that was Akirasu Haya, Tada Kanae, and Gesho Sasaki. And but there were many other people, and that's the people we're going to talk about. Soga and Kaneko in particular, we'll be talking about them later as people greatly influenced by Kiyozawa. But amazingly, he actually, beyond the Jodo Shinshu world, he did he had a lot of admirers or people inspired by him who were not Jodo Shinshu. I think Kitaru Nishida, of course, D.T. Suzuki praises Kiyozawa, and Nakamura Hajime, the great Buddhist scholar, talks about how Kiyozawa was a great influence. So he brought the spirit of getting back to the fundamentals of Buddhism and in this modern world, and trying to show the message of the Buddha that, of course, Shinran proclaimed, try to spread, but he does it in this very modern language and with this seeking spirit, with this. So he himself was, I think, especially when he went to Tokyo, he's reading all this Western philosophy, and he's thinking, how can I make Buddhism speak to people just like these Western works are speaking to him? And I think he succeeded. He died at around the age of 40. But through Seishin Shugi, through that magazine, and through his public lectures, he was able to get that message out and influence a lot of people. And even after he died, his works continued to influence people. Next session, I wanted to talk more about his personal, what you call faith or spirituality. But today I just want to emphasize more the Seishin Shugi, the idea that he brought this, I guess you could say, breath of fresh air into Buddhism to make it something accessible for modern people, to show that this is something we need in our modern world, this idea of getting back to spirituality, just challenging the ego. So I'm going to take this screen off. Let's see. Oh, okay, stop share. Okay. So that's just two of the excerpts from that magazine. But the other ways that he influenced the community besides the magazine and his lectures and working with these fellow seekers in Tokyo was he, as the president of the Shinshu College, there's a quote from him saying he's here to educate the fledgling priests, the people who are going to so that they can go out to even to the smallest countryside temple and be able to convey the message of Buddha. For some of us that might sound kind of course, but actually before his time, he saw that education was lacking, and part of that reform movement he had earlier in his life was trying to get Higashi Honganji to spend money on more on priest education. And now with this being the president of the Shinshu College, he had a chance to put that into action, to make sure that the ministers aren't just learning how to chant and how to conduct the funeral and stuff, but that they actually learn about what the Buddha taught and learn ways to convey that to other people. So it's not just for sophisticated city people, but even in the smallest temple out in the countryside, for them, those people to hear that message of the Buddha. So he structured the education at Shinshu College, and it kind of continues at Otani University today, that you learn not just what Shinran taught in the history of Shinshu, but the broader context of Buddhism, that it's very important to have that idea of history of Buddhism, but how Jodo Shinshu fits in that broader context. In fact, why does Shinran say Shinshu, true essence? Not just of the Pure Land way, but he really feels it's the um, the ultimate expression of Mahayana. So part of the education at Shinshu College was to have that broad immersion in what Buddhism is about. So he had this great influence on the future ministers that would go on, not just scholars, but just the people who are going to go out and talk to their members out in far-flung places in Japan. So I have to say at Old Tiny University, that tradition continues, and that to become a kyoshi, fully ordained minister at Old Tiny University, you are required to have a background in Buddhism outside of Jodo Shinshu to see where Jodo Shinshu fits into that. But also, and that was part of Kiyozawa's idea, you also need to have a background in world religions, have some idea of what the rest of the world, have a sense of the religious tradition beyond Buddhism. And so I was very lucky to have taken some great courses in that background too. So that's kind of my today presentation of Seishin Shugi, this spiritual awareness that Kiyozawa and his group as a collaboration brought to the rapidly modernizing Japan. And I think it has a lot to say to us right now, to remind us all to have that focus, that awareness of the spiritual aspect of life, which is the connection to this unbounded life, the connection to the causes and condition, the peoples and events that are all interconnected, and get beyond that what do you call it, stingy sense of self. I call it that cleanliness to trying to promote the individual self, this individual very limited self. So today I want to open it up to questions on this particular subject. I hope most of you had a chance to read December Fan and get a sense of what Manshi Kiyozawa talked about. But next session, I wanted to go deeper into his own personal, I guess you go with faith or trusting Shinjin, if you want to call it that. But today I wanted to just emphasize his collaboration and his involvement with community, and as a reminder to all of us as well. So, okay. Okay, so also, if you want to raise your hand, then the screen will go to, if you use the hand raising of the reactions, then your screen will pop up. And if you don't have that, just say something, just unmute yourself.
Okay, if I may, since no one's asking, so Reverend Nakai, my question, when Kiyozawa talks about the Buddha in one of the passages, you said, you explained it as more as causes and condition, not some, divine being. So would you say that for Kiyozawa, when he says the Buddha, he's really referring to maybe causes and conditions that embraces our lives, and would that be the description of how he saw the Buddha in that context?
Yeah, I think that's very correct. One of the unfortunate things in that particular piece, the human commitment in the Buddha's work, is because he uses that term Buddha singular, and then in the translation, Dr. Neda uses the pronoun he, the singular masculine pronoun he. It would be very easy to think you're talking about a divine being. Whereas in the Japanese, he doesn't use pronouns, of course, but he does use the term Buddha. And that can be confusing for a lot of people who just think of the historic Buddha, but those of us who've been in Buddhism for a while, we know that there's what they call cosmic Buddhas. The different, even Amida is a part of that idea of the cosmic Buddha. So Buddha in the sense of, cause and condition, true reality, maybe you could say, So, but yeah, I have to say that this piece, it was kind of strange to see him using that, transliteration Buddha instead of Nyorai or, something like that.
How about, does he use the term other power?
Yeah, he does use Tariki, yeah.
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 And then Dr. Haneda, you said, translates it as the power through others, power beyond others.
Yeah, no, power beyond self.
Oh, power beyond self. I see.
Yeah, and that is kind of his unique translation, because too many, and he knows this, and all of us probably know this too. When you say other power, it sounds too much like some divine being above is doing, pulling the strings or something. And so I think for Japanese people, Tariki makes sense, in the Chinese too. But for English speaking people, he felt power beyond self was a little more clear of what's going on. So it's a power that includes the lives of others. I guess you could say lives. Kiyozawa says the people in events. That's one phrase he uses.
Well, I have been using power through others.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I think that captures somewhat what the Kiyozawa is saying.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So power beyond the self that Dr. Haneda uses, I've used that too, but I think power through others, is one that I prefer more and more.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I've been using others' power, using the plural.
Others' power.
Yeah, so to remind us that the other is others, and not just some separate entity. So.
Would you, if I may, so Buddha represents others, but when Kiyozawa also uses the term infinite, so he's also implying that there's no limit to this other, and that there is a power that we cannot really fathom, that it's inconceivable. So we can see the different conditions that support our lives, but there are elements and dimensions beyond that. So I often talk about Amida as also others, but it's also the ultimate beyond others that really supports everything. Yeah.
Right, that's good. And then the other term he used, absolute, zettai. I usually like to call it the whole cloth. We just see a tiny bit of what life is. There's a whole cloth out there that you can't cut up and say this is good and this is bad, or these are reasonable person, these are worthless person. But there's a whole cloth. So zettai, absolute. In English, absolute has some connotations I don't like, but but until we get a better idea what zettai means, I guess the uncuttable, that which the reality that really can't be cut up and put into little boxes. So, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, Jim. Yeah.
Hi, Reverend Patti. Thank you very much. This is, I guess, just a kind of a quick follow-up on Ken Sensei's question. So that if you could elucidate the title of this human commitment in the Buddha's work, he has the characters ten shoku. So 10 is heaven.
Right.
And this is another one of his, I know he doesn't mean the realm of the gods, but he uses this kind of in parallel with this other new terminology. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting title that Dr. Haneda put human commitment in the Buddha's work, which is clearer to us what he's talking about. Because I think Kiyozawa's, he from a very early age, he read the Chinese classics. So 10 would mean like the mandate of heaven. But I think the mandate is heaven as interpreted by humans. So that's why it's a human commitment. 10 shoku. Shoku is the work or employment. And then he uses sei shoku, this idea of holy work or spiritual work. So yeah, it was kind of odd that he uses 10. Yeah, but if you read the introduction to December fan Dr. Neb points that out, that when he uses word heaven, it's in that Chinese sense of the mandate of heaven, not our Christian sense of some,